My ex-husband laughed outside the courthouse and told me I'd be begging for his help by Christmas. Then his phone rang. I watched the color drain out of Daniel Mercer's face so fast it honestly scared me for a second. 1 minute he was standing there in his tailored gray suit, smiling like he'd just won a golf tournament. The next he looked like a man watching his house burn down from the sidewalk. All I heard was one sentence from the phone. She bought the debt. The August heat in Colorado Springs was brutal that afternoon, the kind that bounced off the pavement and climbed right back into your face. My blouse was sticking to my back under my jacket, and my left knee had started throbbing about 20 minutes earlier from standing too long in the courthouse hallway. Divorce court is mostly waiting for signatures, waiting for lawyers, waiting for strangers to decide when your marriage officially becomes paperwork. 18 years reduced to stamped documents and polite nods. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. "What the hell do you mean she bought it?" he snapped. His voice cracked a little on the word she. I remember that clearly. Not because I felt powerful. I didn't. Honestly, I felt tired. Deep down tired. The kind military doctors never really fix. A sheriff's deputy walked past us holding a styrofoam cup of coffee that smelled burned from 10 feet away. Traffic rolled along Tejon Street behind us. Somewhere nearby, somebody was blasting classic rock from an old pickup truck. Normal Thursday afternoon. Meanwhile, my ex-husband looked like he was trying not to throw up. Across the street, his girlfriend was sitting in a white Lexus scrolling through her phone. Kelsey, 30-something, blonde, teeth so white they almost glowed in the sun. Daniel had started dressing younger around the same time he started cheating. Funny how that works. He looked at me then. Really looked at me for maybe the first time in years. "You knew?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer. Partly because I wasn't ready to explain anything. Partly because my knee hurt so bad I was concentrating on not shifting my weight like an old woman. Daniel glanced back at the courthouse doors like he wanted to run back inside and reverse the last 2 hours of his life. Martin, the CFO, was still talking through the phone. Daniel turned away from me completely. "Don't do anything yet," he hissed. "I'll handle it." That was Daniel's favorite sentence for most of our marriage. "I'll handle it." Usually right before things got worse. He ended the call and stood there breathing hard through his nose. I could see sweat gathering along his hairline despite the expensive haircut and the $1,000 suit. Then he laughed once, short and ugly. "You think this is funny?" "No," I said. And I meant it. That's the thing people misunderstand about revenge sometimes. They imagine fireworks, evil smiles, big movie moments where the wronged woman finally becomes cold and untouchable. That wasn't me standing there. I was 42 years old with a damaged knee from Army service, 15 extra pounds I couldn't seem to lose anymore, and a stress headache building behind my eyes. I wasn't standing there feeling victorious. I was standing there wondering whether I'd just detonated the last bridge between the person I used to be and the one I was becoming. Daniel shoved his phone into his pocket too hard. "You have no idea what you're messing with." That almost made me laugh. Because the truth was, logistics had been my entire life. For 21 years in the Army, I'd handled supply movement contracts, equipment coordination, fuel schedules, delayed shipments, broken systems, and panicked commanders pretending they weren't panicked. I understood pressure points very well. Daniel just never bothered learning that about me. He always described my military career like I worked at the DMV. "She's great with paperwork," he'd tell people at dinner parties. And everybody would chuckle politely while I smiled into my wine glass. I used to tell myself those moments didn't matter. Then one day you wake up and realize 1,000 tiny humiliations can weigh more than one betrayal. Kelsey finally looked up from across the street. She could tell something was wrong now. Daniel noticed too. He straightened immediately, smoothed his tie, tried putting the mask back on. That was another thing about him. He treated appearances like life support. "Rachel," he said, lowering his voice, "whatever this is, you need to stop." I looked at him for a long second. This man had once mailed handwritten letters to me in Kuwait because he said hearing my voice over bad satellite calls wasn't enough. This same man once slept in a hospital chair for 2 nights after my knee surgery at Fort Carson. People always want villains to arrive fully formed. Real life isn't that generous. Daniel became cruel slowly. Success helped. Money helped more. The bigger his company got, the smaller he seemed to need me to become. I glanced down at the divorce folder tucked under my arm. Mercer versus Mercer. Finalized. I should have felt devastated standing there. Instead, I mostly felt numb. Maybe because I'd already grieved the marriage months earlier while sitting alone at our kitchen island, listening to him explain why his affair just happened. Like adultery was weather. Daniel's phone buzzed again. This time he looked genuinely afraid to answer it. That feeling spread through me then, cold and strange. Not triumph. Recognition. Because I knew exactly what Martin was probably saying now. The debt package had officially transferred. The signatures were done. The window had closed. Daniel stared at me another second before turning abruptly and walking toward the Lexus. Kelsey stepped out looking confused. "Baby, what's wrong?" He ignored her. Just opened the passenger door harder than necessary and climbed inside. The Lexus peeled away from the curb so fast it nearly clipped a parking meter. And there I stood outside the courthouse in the Colorado heat with my bad knee aching and divorce papers pressed against my ribs, while 18 years of marriage disappeared down Cascade Avenue. For the first time in a very long time, Daniel Mercer looked like a man who understood he was no longer in control. And the truth, that scared me almost as much as it scared him. 3 days after the divorce, I was standing in the plumbing aisle at Home Depot trying to remember whether the rental house in Fountain needed a 1/2-inch valve or a 3/4-inch one when Daniel left me a voicemail. "You've made your point, Rachel," he said. "Call me back before this turns into something ugly." I actually laughed out loud. A retired couple nearby looked at me like I might be unstable. Maybe I was a little. Because standing there under fluorescent lights holding a brass valve in one hand, I suddenly realized something almost funny about my marriage. Daniel still thought I was reacting emotionally. Like this whole thing had happened because I got angry and reckless after the divorce. That man had lived beside me for 18 years and still didn't understand I was never impulsive. Not once. I bought the valve stopped by Costco for paper towels and dog food, then drove back to my place on the west side of Colorado Springs with the windows down, because the AC in my Jeep only worked when it felt like cooperating. That Jeep drove Daniel crazy. He used to beg me to replace it. "Rachel, you're 42 years old," he'd say. "You look ridiculous driving this thing." Meanwhile, he was spending $1,400 on loafers shaped like something a magician would wear in Vegas. Funny world. By the time I got home, my knee was throbbing hard enough I had to sit in the driveway for a minute before getting out. That part bothered me more than I liked admitting. When I was younger, my body always felt dependable. Army dependable, like if I pushed hard enough it would obey me. Then Iraq happened, then surgeries, then age. Nobody warns women how invisible they start feeling in their 40s, especially after injury. Especially after a husband starts looking through you instead of at you. I carried the groceries inside slowly and found another voicemail waiting. This one calmer. "Rach, look, Martin says this debt thing may not even stick. We should talk before lawyers turn it into a circus." That was Daniel. Even panicked, he still needed to sound smarter than everyone else. I deleted the message and started unloading groceries. Folgers, Greek yogurt, frozen chicken breasts, cheap sandwich bread. Not exactly billionaire shopping habits. And honestly, that was part of the reason Daniel never saw me clearly. My money never looked like money to him. Daniel understood visible wealth. Luxury watches, steakhouse reservations, golf memberships, imported coffee machines nobody knew how to operate. The louder the purchase, the happier he got. I remember one Christmas he spent $12,000 on an Italian espresso machine the size of a lawnmower. He invited friends over just to watch some guy install it. Meanwhile, I sat at the kitchen island balancing property taxes for our rental houses, while Daniel explained crema to people who drank Bud Light. That should have embarrassed him. Instead, somehow it embarrassed me. That's the strange thing about long marriages. Sometimes you slowly adapt to somebody else's version of reality until you stop noticing how ridiculous it is. Daniel liked telling people he built everything from scratch. Not technically a lie, he worked hard, very hard. But he also married a woman who quietly handled half the foundation underneath his life, while he collected applause upstairs. I managed our taxes, insurance renewals, retirement contributions, vendor spreadsheets when he got overwhelmed, property records, loan tracking, half the early bookkeeping for Mercer Precision before he hired accountants and started pretending he'd done it alone. And I did it while deploying overseas half the damn time. The irony still makes me tired. A week after our divorce hearing, I drove down to Pueblo to check on one of my rental properties near the old rail yard district. Tiny little duplex, nothing fancy. I bought it back in 2012 after my second deployment because my grandfather used to say real wealth usually looks boring at first. At the time, Daniel laughed at me for buying ugly military housing. 10 years later, the property value had nearly doubled. Turns out boring works pretty well. The tenant, an older guy named Luis, met me outside while holding a garden hose. "Miss Mercer," he said, "water heater's acting stupid again." "Join the club," I told him. He laughed so hard he started coughing. People trusted me because I paid attention. That mattered more than charm most of the time. Daniel never understood that either. On the drive back to Colorado Springs, I kept thinking about the first years of our marriage. Back when he still respected me. Or maybe back when he still needed me enough to pretend he did. When we met, I was stationed at Fort Carson, and Daniel was just another ambitious guy trying to grow a small machining business out of a rented warehouse. He used to bring me burgers during late shifts. Used to ask questions about Army life like he genuinely admired it. Then the company grew. Then the money grew. Then his ego grew faster than both. Somewhere along the line, my military career stopped sounding impressive to him and started sounding inconvenient. At business dinners, he'd grin and say things like, "Rachel's the organized one. I'd lose my head without her spreadsheets." Everybody always laughed. And I laughed too because correcting him in public felt rude. That's how women disappear sometimes. Not all at once, piece by piece, joke by joke. You become useful instead of visible. That night I sat at my kitchen table reviewing old financial records while rain tapped softly against the windows. Daniel thought he hid his problems well. He didn't. 6 months earlier, while preparing documents for the divorce, I started noticing irregular borrowing patterns tied to Mercer Precision. Short-term loans stacking on top of each other. Aggressive expansion spending. Cash flow gaps. Then I found the real problem. Daniel had borrowed almost $8 million against future growth projections that didn't exist yet. Part of that money funded a new manufacturing facility. Part funded his lifestyle. And part, God help him, went toward the Scottsdale house he bought for Kelsey. I leaned back slowly in my chair that night, staring at the numbers. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the mountains. I remember whispering one sentence out loud to an empty kitchen. "What are you doing, Daniel?" Not angry. Not yet. Just disappointed. Because beneath all the arrogance and cheating and expensive nonsense, some stubborn part of me still remembered the young man who once drove through a snowstorm to bring me cold medicine outside Fort Carson. That man would have been ashamed of this one. And maybe the saddest part of all, Daniel still thought I was too simple to notice his empire was leaking from every pipe in the house. The first time Marlene Price told me to buy Daniel's debt, I thought she'd lost her mind. We were sitting in her office in downtown Denver on a gray Tuesday morning, while traffic crawled below 16 floors of glass windows. Her office smelled faintly like coffee and old paper. Real paper. Not the fake lemon smell law offices usually pump through the vents. Marlene slid a folder across the conference table toward me. "I think you need to look at this carefully," she said. I didn't touch it. Outside, rain streaked the windows in crooked lines, and my knee was already acting up from the drive up I-25. "What exactly am I looking at?" I asked. "The truth," she said calmly. That woman could make a weather report sound intimidating. Marlene was 58, sharp as broken glass and impossible to rattle. Twice divorced. Never apologized for anything unless she truly meant it. My grandfather trusted her more than almost anybody. Which meant I trusted her too, usually. I finally opened the folder. Inside were summaries from Mercer Precision's lenders, internal projections, restructuring notes, and enough debt exposure to make my stomach tighten. Daniel hadn't just been overspending. He'd been gambling. I scanned line after line while Marlene sat quietly across from me sipping black coffee. "Jesus," I muttered. "Pretty much." I kept reading. Bridge loans. Delayed vendor payments. Equipment financing. Over-leveraged expansion. Everything balanced on future contracts that hadn't materialized yet. Daniel used to accuse me of thinking too small. But logistics teaches you one thing very quickly. If a system depends on perfect conditions to survive, it's already failing. I flipped another page. Then another. Then I saw the Chicago banking group preparing to unload a distressed debt package tied directly to Mercer Precision. That was the moment my pulse started climbing. "Marlene, she called me last month," Marlene said quietly. "Who?" "Kelsey." I looked up sharply. "What?" "She wanted to know if Daniel could access trust assets through the divorce." I stared at her. Marlene gave a dry little shrug. Apparently she thought old family money worked like a Netflix password. I laughed before I could stop myself. First real laugh I'd had in weeks. Then the laughter faded. Daniel knows about the trust. He knows enough to regret ignoring the prenup. I leaned back slowly in the leather chair. Rain rattled harder against the windows. Part of me wanted to walk out right then, drive back to Colorado Springs, forget all of it. Because despite everything, I still didn't want to become cruel. People think revenge feels clean when you imagine it. It doesn't. Not when real history is attached to it. I looked down at the folder again. "Why are you showing me this?" Because somebody's going to buy that debt package, Marlene said. And if Daniel keeps control long enough, he's going to drag that company straight into the ground. He built that company, and now he's bleeding it dry. Her tone stayed even, matter of fact. That almost made it worse. I rubbed my forehead. Marlene, I don't want to destroy him. That's good, she replied. People who enjoy power usually shouldn't have it. I looked back at the numbers. The thing people misunderstand about Army logistics is that it isn't really about supplies. It's about pressure. What breaks first? What keeps everybody alive? What happens when one bad decision starts rippling outward through hundreds of smaller systems? That's what I saw in those documents. Not just Daniel failing. Workers failing with him. Suppliers. Families. Retirement accounts. Men in Pueblo who'd spent 30 years machining parts inside hot factories, counting on pensions that suddenly looked unstable. And underneath all of it, Daniel still thought image mattered more than math. I closed the folder. No. Marlene nodded once like she expected that answer. All right. That's it. That's your decision. I narrowed my eyes. You're manipulating me. Rachel, honey, if I were manipulating you, I'd remind you Daniel bought his mistress a $3 million Scottsdale house while telling employees bonuses were frozen. I looked away toward the rain. Damn her. Because that worked a little. She softened slightly then. Listen to me carefully, she said. This isn't about punishing your ex-husband for cheating. Men have been cheating badly since the invention of whiskey and hotel rooms. I snorted quietly. This is about preventing a collapse before people get hurt. I hated that she was right. That was the problem. If this had only been about me, I could have walked away. But once workers got involved, my brain shifted into something old and familiar, something military. Contain damage. Stabilize systems. Protect people downstream. I spent 21 years doing exactly that. Marlene pushed another page toward me. This would go through the family trust's distressed asset partnership, she explained. Not directly through you. Completely legal, completely discreet. How fast? Very. That's what worries me. The bank wants out before the market notices. I stared at the table for a long time. Then finally said the thing that had been sitting in my chest since the courthouse. If I do this, what does that make me? Marlene didn't answer immediately. She looked out the rain-covered windows first, then back at me. Power doesn't make you, Daniel, she said quietly. What you do with it does. I wish I could tell you that gave me clarity. It didn't. I left her office feeling sick. The parking garage smelled like wet concrete and motor oil. My knee screamed walking down the ramp to the Jeep. By the time I got inside, I was sweating through my shirt despite the cold rain outside. I just sat there gripping the steering wheel. I thought about Daniel laughing outside the courthouse. Then I thought about the machinists in Pueblo. Guys with bad backs and mortgages and grandkids. People who probably trusted Daniel. I started the Jeep. Turned it off again. Called Marlene. Hung up before she answered. Then sat there another 10 minutes staring through the windshield while rain hammered the roof. Finally, I called her back. This time she answered immediately. You all right? No, I admitted. Silence. Then I took a breath. If we do this, I said slowly, we do it clean. We will. No games, no humiliating him for fun, no trying to take every damn thing he has. Understood. The workers come first. Marlene's voice softened just a little. Your grandfather would have liked hearing that. I closed my eyes briefly. Then I gave her authorization to move forward. Just like that. No dramatic music. No evil grin. Just a tired woman in an old Jeep signing paperwork that would change both our lives forever. Afterward, I cried harder than I expected. Not because I felt guilty. Because deep down I finally understood something painful. My marriage wasn't ending anymore. It was already gone. And this was just the paperwork catching up. About 2 weeks after the debt package transferred, Daniel stopped leaving angry voicemails. That's how I knew things were getting serious. Angry people still think they're in control. Quiet people are usually the ones drowning. I was at physical therapy when Marlene called with the first real update. The clinic sat in a small medical plaza near Garden of the Gods Road. Same soft instrumental music every visit. Same smell of disinfectant and burnt coffee from the waiting area. My therapist Nate was stretching my knee while I tried not to swear. You're tight today, he said. Been a stressful month. No kidding. My phone buzzed against the chair beside me. Marlena. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. Hey, I answered. Vendor restrictions started this morning. I closed my eyes briefly. How bad? Bad enough his board is asking questions now. Nate glanced up at my face. You okay? Yeah, I lied. Marlene continued. One of Daniel's lenders froze part of the expansion credit line. There it was. The first crack. Not dramatic from the outside, no explosions, no federal agents storming offices, just pressure. The kind that spreads quietly through conference rooms and accounting departments before anybody in public notices. That's how most collapses actually happen. Slowly, then all at once. After therapy, I drove to Costco because life keeps being ordinary even when your past is unraveling in the background. That part surprised me. You think revenge will feel cinematic. Mostly it feels like buying paper towels while wondering whether your ex-husband is panicking inside a board meeting. I was loading cases of bottled water into the Jeep when my phone buzzed again. Daniel. I stared at the screen for 3 rings before answering. What? Silence. Then breathing. Finally he spoke. Did you really do this? His voice sounded tired, not angry, tired. I shut the Jeep hatch slowly. You should be more specific. Don't play games with me, Rachel. I'm not. Another silence. Then he laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Martin says you're behind the creditor group. I'm part of it. You don't even understand how this works. That irritated me more than it should have. Even now, even after all this, still talking to me like I was some confused housewife who wandered into finance by accident. I understand enough, I said calmly. You could destroy the company. No, I replied. Debt and bad decisions destroy companies. He exhaled sharply through his nose. You always do this. Do what? Act morally superior, I almost answered. Then stopped myself. Because arguing with Daniel had become exhausting years before the divorce ever happened. You done? I asked. What happened to you? That question sat strangely in my chest. What happened to me? I wanted to say I got older. I got tired. I stopped shrinking myself to make your ego comfortable. Instead, I just said goodbye, Daniel. Then I hung up. That weekend, Colorado got hit with one of those cold rainstorms that make the whole state smell like wet dirt and pine needles. My knee hated every second of it. I spent Saturday morning reviewing maintenance receipts for the Pueblo duplex while drinking terrible grocery store coffee and listening to thunder roll across the mountains. Normal life, at least on the surface. Underneath it, Mercer Precision was beginning to buckle. Marlene kept updates short. Vendor panic increasing. Board nervous. Cash reserves tightening. Daniel pushing harder for emergency financing. And somewhere in the middle of all that, Kelsey quietly disappeared from social media. No more Scottsdale pool photos. No more luxury dinners. No more grateful blessed life captions. Funny how fast romance dies around financial disclosures. The steakhouse confrontation happened 4 days later. Garden Grace in downtown Denver. Marlene and I were halfway through dinner when she noticed him first. Well, she muttered, reaching for her wine glass. Here comes poor judgment in human form. I turned around. Daniel was crossing the restaurant floor toward us wearing a navy blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. But something about him looked off. Older. The gray at his temples had spread noticeably in just a few weeks. His face looked puffy and there were dark half-moons under his eyes. He'd been drinking more. I could tell immediately. Rachel, he said carefully. Marlene. Marlene gave him the same expression people give telemarketers. Daniel ignored it. Can we talk? You're talking, Marlene said. He pulled out the empty chair anyway. I noticed his hands trembling slightly when he sat down. That shook me more than I expected. Because for 18 years, Daniel Mercer had been the calmest man in every room. Now he looked like somebody trying to hold himself together with duct tape. A waiter approached awkwardly. Daniel ordered whiskey immediately. Marlene raised one eyebrow after the waiter left. Bold choice for a man currently on fire. Daniel shot her a look, then turned back to me. Come on, Rach. That nickname hit harder than it should have. For one stupid second, I remembered being 24 years old in a Fort Carson parking lot while he kissed me goodbye before deployment. Memory is cruel like that. It sneaks good moments into terrible ones. We built a life together, he said quietly. You built a company, I answered. There's a difference. His jaw tightened. You think these people care about you. Those investors, the board. This isn't about me. He leaned forward. You don't know what you're playing with. That did it. Something inside me finally hardened. Because he still believed I was small. Still believed I was confused. Still believed he was the only adult in the room. I set my fork down carefully. That was always your mistake, Daniel. He stared at me. Then anger flashed across his face. There she is, he snapped. Finally, the real Rachel. No, I said softly. The real Rachel was handling your disasters for 20 years while you took credit for surviving them. For a moment, he looked genuinely wounded. Then the whiskey arrived. He grabbed the glass too quickly. Do you have any idea what happens if this restructuring goes wrong? Yes, I said. People get hurt. People always get hurt. A couple at the next table glanced over. Daniel lowered his voice immediately. That old obsession with appearances again. I can fix this, he muttered. Marlene spoke for the first time in several minutes. With what money? Daniel ignored her. Then his phone buzzed. He checked the screen, and I watched whatever color remained in his face disappear completely. He stood abruptly. What now? He whispered into the phone. Long silence. Then, no, absolutely not. He looked at me differently after that call. Not angry anymore. Scared. When he hung up, Marlene already knew. Retirement contributions, she asked. Daniel said nothing. That was answer enough. My stomach dropped. Because delayed retirement contributions weren't just reckless. They crossed a line. Daniel looked at me desperately then. And for the first time since the divorce, I saw something worse than arrogance. I saw a man losing control of himself. Rachel, he said quietly, please. God help me, part of me almost folded right there. Then I remembered hearing him laugh about government furniture in front of Kelsey's daughter at a Christmas party. Like my military career was some joke. And just like that, the softness disappeared. No, I said. Daniel stood there breathing hard. Then he walked out of the restaurant alone. Marlene watched him leave through the window. Finally, she said quietly, there's an emergency board meeting Friday morning. I looked down at my untouched steak. If I go in there? You stop him before this gets worse. Outside, rain streaked down the Denver streets while traffic lights reflected red and gold across the wet pavement. And for the first time since all this started, I realized there was no version of this story where everybody walked away intact. I barely slept the night before the board meeting. Not because I was nervous about facing Daniel. Honestly, I'd been emotionally preparing for that man most of my adult life. What kept me awake was the thought of those employees. Men and women close to retirement age who'd spent decades standing on concrete factory floors, while Daniel played entrepreneur in custom suits. People who trusted the company to still be there when their knees gave out. People like me. By 6:30 Friday morning, I was already driving north through Colorado Springs, with black coffee in a travel mug, and a heating pad pressed against my left knee at red lights. The mountains looked pale blue under the early morning haze. Traffic crawled near Academy Boulevard. Local radio hosts argued about property taxes and Broncos preseason rumors like the world wasn't quietly collapsing for somebody across town. I wore black slacks, a navy blouse, and low shoes because my knee couldn't tolerate heels anymore. No dramatic power outfit. No revenge dress. Just clothes I could survive the day in. Marlene met me outside Mercer Precision headquarters at 8:30 sharp. You eat anything, she asked. Half a banana. Living dangerously. I snorted. The building itself looked exactly like Daniel. Too much glass, too much steel. Expensive without warmth. Employees were already gathering near the entrance in small nervous groups. Some recognized me immediately. Most looked surprised to see me there. One older machinist named Roy Beckett blinked twice before saying, Rachel Mercer. Morning, Roy. Haven't seen you around here in years. Probably because Daniel stopped inviting me. That earned a tired laugh. Roy had worked there almost 30 years. Former Army too, Desert Storm. His shoulders looked heavier than I remembered. Everybody's due after 60. As Marlene and I walked inside, I could feel eyes following us. Whispers. People knew something bad was happening. They just didn't know how bad yet. The boardroom sat on the top floor overlooking Colorado Springs. Big polished table, expensive leather chairs, glass walls meant to impress visitors. Daniel loved rooms like that. Rooms designed to make men feel important. When we walked in, conversation stopped immediately. Daniel stood near the windows, speaking quietly with Martin Vale, the CFO. He turned the second he saw me. For a brief moment, something flashed across his face that almost looked hopeful. Then he saw Marlene behind me. Hope disappeared. Rachel, he said carefully, didn't expect to see you here. That's been your problem for years. A couple board members shifted awkwardly. Daniel forced a smile. Cute. But he looked terrible. The expensive suit couldn't hide it anymore. His skin had a gray tone under the fluorescent lighting. His eyes were bloodshot. Even his posture looked wrong somehow, like stress had physically shortened him. Martin wouldn't look at either of us. That told me almost everything I needed to know. The board chair, a retired banker named Walter Green, cleared his throat. Let's sit down. Nobody touched the catered breakfast. That's always a bad sign in corporate America. Marlene opened first. Calm, professional, surgical. She explained that the distressed debt package connected to Mercer Precision had legally transferred through a private investment partnership backed by my family trust. She emphasized several times that this did not mean immediate liquidation. It meant leverage, oversight, control over restructuring negotiations moving forward. Daniel interrupted almost immediately. "This is absurd," he snapped. "Rachel has no business being involved in corporate finance." That one almost made me smile. Not because it hurt anymore, because it was so painfully predictable. Marlene slid documents across the table. "The creditor group now controls the company's primary debt position," she said evenly. "Under current covenant conditions, concerns regarding financial management must be reviewed immediately." Daniel laughed too loudly. A nervous laugh, the kind people use when they realize they're losing the room. "Oh, come on," he said, looking around the table. "This is emotional retaliation from my ex-wife." Nobody answered. That silence rattled him more than arguing would have. Walter folded his hands carefully. "Daniel, were retirement contribution delays concealed from the board?" Daniel's face changed instantly. "There were temporary adjustments." "Were they disclosed?" "They were being handled internally." Martin finally spoke, quietly. "No, they weren't." Daniel turned toward him so fast his chair scraped hard against the floor. "Martin, you told me not to bring it to the board yet," Martin said without looking up. The room went dead silent. I watched Daniel realize in real time that he no longer controlled the narrative. That's the dangerous moment for people like him. When charm fails and panic takes over. He stood abruptly. "This company has my name on it." Nobody moved. "I built this place," he shouted. "You think these workers understand what it takes to keep the lights on? Bad mistake. Huge mistake. Because through the glass walls, employees could hear parts of this now." I saw Roy outside the room slowly straighten his posture. Daniel kept going. "I carried everybody here, everybody." "No," I said quietly. The room stopped again. Daniel turned toward me, breathing hard. I kept my voice calm. "You carried debt. Other people carried the company." His jaw clenched. Then came the desperation. "We built this together, baby." God, that word. Baby. Like we were suddenly back in our 20s before all the lies and affairs and humiliation. For 1 second I almost saw the old Daniel again. The younger man who used to bring me burgers outside Fort Carson during late shifts. Then I looked at Martin's face, at Walter's expression, at the workers standing outside that room wondering whether their retirement was disappearing. And something inside me settled permanently. "I'm not here to destroy you, Daniel," I said. "I'm here to stop you from destroying everyone else." Nobody spoke after that. Daniel looked around the room searching for support. He found none. Then the collapse started. Not dramatic screaming. Not movie villain behavior. Worse. He started talking too much. Explaining. Defending. Contradicting himself. The more scared he became, the more honest he accidentally got. He admitted cash flow problems were worse than reported. Admitted expansion projections failed months earlier. Admitted he expected future contracts to save them. At one point he actually snapped. "You can't run a company worrying about every damn worker complaint." That sentence finished him. I saw it happen. The board members pulled away emotionally right there. Even Walter looked disgusted. Marlene calmly outlined the proposed restructuring terms. Daniel would step down temporarily during financial review. Retirement obligations would be protected first. No immediate layoffs during stabilization. Independent oversight. Mandatory financial audits. And if substance abuse concerns were confirmed, treatment requirements tied to his compensation package. Daniel stared at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. Maybe he didn't. Roy muttered from outside the room. "Hell, I thought she sold Tupperware." A couple workers laughed nervously. Even I almost smiled. The tension needed somewhere to go. Walter finally stood. "Daniel," he said quietly, "I think it would be best if you left for now." That hurt him more than shouting ever could have. Because nobody argued. Nobody defended him. Nobody followed him when he walked toward the door. Martin stayed seated. The board stayed seated. The workers outside parted silently as Daniel passed through them. No applause. No insults. Just silence. And somehow that silence felt heavier than anything else in the room. After he disappeared down the hallway, my hands finally started shaking under the table. Marlene noticed immediately. Without looking at me, she slid a glass of water closer. "Breathe," she murmured. So I did. For the first time in years, I finally did. 6 months later, I was standing in a Wyoming cemetery with mud on my boots and wind pushing against my jacket hard enough to make my knee ache. March in Wyoming doesn't care how old you are or what you've survived. The wind treats everybody the same. I stood in front of my grandfather's grave holding a paper coffee cup that had already gone cold. Warren Price, 1929 to 2018. Banker, rancher, quietest wealthy man I ever knew. When I was little, he used to tell me that real strength rarely announced itself. Attracting attention is expensive, he'd say. The wrong kind of attention costs even more. Back then, I thought he was talking about money. Turns out he was talking about people, too. I looked down at the headstone and laughed softly to myself. Well, I muttered you were right about Daniel. The wind carried the words away across the cemetery. A year earlier, I would have hated the idea of standing alone at 42 after a divorce. Now, honestly, the silence felt peaceful. Not happy all the time, not magically healed, just peaceful. That surprised me most. Mercer Precision was still operating. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, but operating. The restructuring process took months of ugly meetings, audits, negotiations, and long conference calls that made me miss Army supply briefings. A few management positions got cut. Some projects disappeared completely, but most of the workers stayed employed. Retirement contributions were restored under outside supervision. And for the first time in years, the company was spending money like survival actually mattered more than appearances. Funny concept. Daniel officially resigned 3 months after the board meeting. The board announced it publicly on a rainy Thursday afternoon while I was buying windshield wipers at AutoZone. That's another thing nobody tells you about major life moments. Half of them happen while you're doing errands. Marlene called me afterward. Well, she said the king is finally off the throne. Don't call him that. You're right, she replied. Kings usually plan better. I laughed hard enough a cashier looked over at me. Daniel moved to Arizona after rehab. Scottsdale, ironically enough. Smaller condo, consulting work, fewer people returning his calls. From what I heard, he finally stopped drinking like a man trying to outrun himself. Part of me was glad. Part of me stayed angry too. Both things can exist together. That took me a long time to learn. About a month after he moved, Daniel sent me an email. Not a dramatic one. No begging, no manipulation. Just honest in a way I hadn't seen from him in years. He admitted he got addicted to looking successful. Admitted he treated admiration like oxygen. Admitted he spent years resenting my calm because he mistook it for weakness. One sentence stuck with me. I spent so much time trying to feel bigger than everyone else that I forgot how to simply be decent. I read the email once while sitting at my kitchen table. Then I closed the laptop. I never answered. Not because I hated him. Because I finally understood something important. Closure doesn't always require another conversation. Sometimes closure is the moment you stop needing one. I moved closer to my mother outside Cheyenne after everything settled down. Small house, quiet road, big sky. The Jeep came with me, obviously. Still rattles when I hit potholes. Still smells faintly like old leather and motor oil. I kept physical therapy twice a week. My knee still acts up when storms roll in. And no, I never magically became thin again. That part matters more than people think. There's this pressure on women, especially after divorce, to come back better than ever. Younger somehow, hotter somehow. Like survival only counts if you become prettier afterward. I got tired of that idea. My body carried deployments, long nights, stress, loss. Years of trying to hold together a marriage that had been cracking underneath me long before the divorce papers showed up. I stopped treating those things like failures. One afternoon at the VA center in Cheyenne, another woman veteran asked how I stayed so calm through everything. I almost laughed. Calm. If only she'd seen me crying alone in that Jeep outside Marlene's office. If only she'd heard me throwing old coffee mugs into moving boxes after the divorce because suddenly everything annoyed me. I wasn't calm. I was disciplined. There's a difference. Discipline is getting up anyway. Going to physical therapy anyway. Reviewing documents anyway. Telling the truth anyway. Even when your hands shake. Especially then. I started volunteering twice a month with a women veterans business program after moving north. Mostly helping women avoid financial mistakes, teaching them how to read contracts, how to protect assets, how to stop apologizing for understanding money. One woman in her 60s looked at me during a workshop and said, "I wish somebody taught me this 30 years ago." That stayed with me for days. Because I think a lot of women from our generation learned how to support people before we learned how to protect ourselves. Near the cemetery gate, I shifted my weight carefully and looked back one last time toward my grandfather's grave. The Wyoming wind cut across the hills sharp and cold. I pulled my jacket tighter. Then I said something out loud I think I'd been carrying for years. I should have spoken sooner. Not just to Daniel. To myself. The truth was surviving without him was never the hard part. The hard part was learning I still had value after spending years inside somebody else's opinion of me. And maybe that sounds dramatic, but if you've ever spent enough time feeling invisible, you understand exactly what I mean. I used to think the victory would feel loud. Turns out the real victory felt quiet. A peaceful house, a steady paycheck. A body that still hurts sometimes but keeps moving anyway. The ability to look in the mirror without apologizing for the woman standing there. That was enough. More than enough, actually.